afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our sixth in our series of Meet the Finalists webinars. I'm Will, Joint Managing Director of Chamberlain Dunn, who are the creators and organisers of the Advancing Healthcare Awards for allied health professionals, healthcare scientists, and those who work alongside them. For the past 15 years, these UK-wide awards have highlighted the often overlooked contribution that these health professionals make to prevention, diagnosis, treatment, recovery, and rehabilitation. We should by now, of course, have celebrated our 2020 winners, but this has been postponed until the 16th of October, and like many others, turned into a virtual ceremony. It will be different, but nonetheless exciting, so please join us then, and you can book via the website, so make sure you encourage your colleagues to register also. And it certainly does seem an age since the judging day back in February. The gap has given us time to focus on our finalists and to invite them to tell us about their work, to reflect on their experiences during COVID-19 and to share how their new world looks. The gap has also given us the chance to recognise and record the incredible work that healthcare scientists and AHPs have been doing over the past few months. Our esteemed gallery has nearly 200 nominations of individuals and teams who have risen to the COVID challenge, often moving into roles that are a very long way from their usual work. Before we get going, I'd also like to mention a spin-off publication from our 2020 awards, Making Health and Social Care Greener. It's a collection of green ideas submitted by many of our entrants in response to DEFRA's Year of Green Action, and it also reveals the winners of the award, and you can download it free from our website. Today we'll be hearing from the finalists in the AHP Clinical Leadership Award sponsored by Allied Health Solutions. This award recognises the vision and drive, resilience and commitment of AHP leaders to their service and making an impact on patient care. And we're delighted that June Davis, Director of Allied Health Solutions, is in our chair today and will introduce the speakers and lead the discussion. Over to you, June.
Thank you very much, Will, and welcome everybody to Meet the Finalists. I think I'm delighted to chair today because we have seen some fantastic entrants for this category, and they are just such impressive submissions that it's quite humbling to read and see and speak, and you will hear some of those shortly. I think also a reason why Allied Health Solutions has sponsored this award is because we have an absolute passion as an organisation for AHP leadership and strengthening and realising the potential of AHPs across the system. And as Will has said, the contribution to leadership is significant across all of the disciplines. I think it's also a fantastic opportunity to celebrate the breadth of what AHP clinical leadership is, and the three finalists demonstrate that in spades, having heard them at the judging day, which was a long time ago. And I think I can't wait to hear John, Andy and Amanda again, actually, because it's brilliant to hear what you have to say, and I think for others to hear also. So I think without further ado, if I may, I will pass on firstly and introduce Jon Lee, who is Professional Lead Physiotherapist and Allied Health Professional Forum Chair at the Royal Berkshire NHS Foundation Trust. And Jon is just going to give a short piece on his submission and projects that he's been engaged with. And we are giving each of the speakers 10 minutes, and if anybody has any questions, please do either hold them until the end of the 10 minutes and we can go around, and or put them in the chat box and we'll go through. So over to Jon. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just bringing up a presentation. Can you see that on your screens?
Yes, thank you, Jon.
Fantastic. So firstly, thank you to June for sharing today, and a further thank you to the AH Awards team for all their hard work, particularly in light of the disruptions associated with the pandemic. And as has been touched upon, I lead the physiotherapy service at the Royal Berkshire Hospital in Reading, and act as the AHP Forum Chair. Now, over the last 3 years or so, I've been working extensively to develop the profile and leadership potential of AHPs in and around our organisation, and it's incredibly humbling to be shortlisted for this award. But the progress that we have made today has very much been a team effort, and I'm talking to you today on behalf of all the individuals who've contributed to the progress that we've made over the last sort of 3 years or so within my organisation. So I'll start by taking you to the beginning of our sort of AHP journey. And historically, AHP services in our organisation have very much operated in silos, have been situated under different care groups, and have experienced a large gulf between senior board level representation, which has come from the Director of Nursing, and AHP service leads and clinicians, the consequences of which have meant that AHP services were very much a blind spot at board level. There were limited opportunities for career progression, and there was a real lack of senior AHP voice within the organisation. So early on, I approached the Director of Nursing as the senior AHP representative within the organisation, as well as the CEO, to begin discussing the profile and potential of AHPs within the organisation. And at this time, there was a wave of publications coming out of NHSI at a national level, really advocating the benefits of AHP leadership. And fortunately, we are very lucky to have a fantastic senior leadership team who are open to exploring new concepts and ideas. So off the back of these early conversations, we got in touch with NHSI, where we were able to link up with Stuart Palmer and Joe Fillingham. And this led to both of them being invited into the organisation to present on the value of AHPs in senior roles and the benefits of diverse leadership. And this really gave us the opportunity for the first time to bring together all of our AHP services, and each service was given the opportunity to present on their recent achievements and successes to both senior board members within the organisation as well as to one another. And hearing Stuart and Joe talk really sort of lit a fire under our AHP leaders, who recognise there's a tremendous opportunity for us to contribute more through collaboration and partnership working. And this was very much echoed in the board members in the room. So following this event, our CEO supported the formation of an AHP forum with a commitment to 30, 60 and 90-day reviews of progress. And from this point, we very much established ourselves as a forum and set about familiarising ourselves with one another's services and really exploring our strengths and challenges as an AHP body. And we really looked at what individual services could learn from one another to develop and improve, as well as identifying opportunities to work in collaboration to improve the delivery of care for patients. And out of this exercise, rather organically, emerged a set of objectives, which we then went on to use to guide our future steps and directions. And since the establishment of our AHP forum, we're some way down the line now. And we've seen a number of positive changes and accomplishments as a working group. We've successfully mapped our AHP representation across the organisation, including governance, quality and senior meeting structures. And we've been able to address those gaps in representation. We've been able to coordinate an extensive programme across the organisation to raise the internal profile of AHPs with key stakeholders, which has done wonders for relationships. And we've worked with matrons and members of our organisational development team to fundamentally change the organisation's approach to roles and recruitment. And we very much shifted from roles being professionally protected to an open skills and competence model of recruitment, ensuring the best person for the job and really opening career opportunities for AHPs that were previously closed. And we've benefited from further changes in our business case groups, where the impact of cases on AHP services must now be considered and discussed, where historically this was not the case. And we've really benefited from a number of collaborative AHP joint projects, with examples such as a joint initiative between our dietetic and physiotherapy services, which is focused on improving nutrition and exercise in the elderly following hip fracture. We have a joint initiative between our orthopedic, neurology and physiotherapy services to establish one-stop carpal tunnel services. We have implemented an orthotics-led neurology round, which is in place to share, learn and upskill our therapists. And we've had great success with occupational therapists working alongside paramedics in the community. And we're currently exploring the opportunity for reducing falls risks for patients with visual impairments through collaborative working between our ophthalmology and occupational therapy services. So one of our biggest successes today is the steps we've taken to inspire AHPs of the future into the profession. And we've developed a joint careers event which invites schools from the local area into the organisation, and students can follow the path two patients would take from admission into the hospital through to discharge. And this enables them to see the impact AHP services have on these patients' journeys and the difference to people's lives we as AHPs make. And in February of this year, we had over 80 students from schools across Berkshire attend this event. So in terms of where we are now, just prior to COVID, I've presented a paper to our Executive Management Committee, sponsored by our Director of Nursing, which has highlighted the difference AHP leadership has made in our organisation. And we've requested that the board consider the concept of a dedicated strategic AHP leadership role. Now, the response was an incredibly positive one, with the next step to look at how such a role could be realised and fit within the existing organisational structure. However, since then, COVID has obviously struck and it's been very much all hands on deck. And as a consequence, we've lost a great deal of that momentum and are yet to get back on track with regards to next steps. But I remain very hopeful and optimistic that our vision for AHP representation and leadership will very much be realised in the not too distant future. So I hope that you found this interesting, and if there's anything I can do to help anyone out there at the start of their own AHP leadership development journey, please feel free to get in touch with me, and I'm more than happy to help in any way that I can. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, John. A lot covered in a really short space of time, and thank you so much for keeping to time there as well. I'd like to hand over to colleagues who will be listening or on the call as to if they've got any particular questions. I know I have, but I'll hold that thought, if I may, John, until I won't jump in first. Anybody got any questions they'd like to ask? To either raise a hand or a virtual hand or put a note. Well, I will start if people are thinking, John. I have a couple. My first is you kindly volunteered. If you'd like anybody to, support anybody, that would be great. As part of this call, have you got any top tips? Because clearly you've done quite a lot in quite a short space of time, John, with your fantastic team and executive team. Would you be able to share perhaps a couple of top tips for others? Because it's brilliant progress.
From my perspective, I think working in partnership is sort of the key, and really identifying those sort of key players in your organisation at a senior level that are open to those new ideas and concepts. And there's a tremendous amount of resource and support out there from other organisations and NHS England. So if you need that support, I would fully encourage you to reach out, because there's a fantastically supportive community. And as I've said, this is by no means an individual effort. There's been tremendous amount of people involved in this journey and getting us to this point. So I think it's just starting and identifying who you can talk to in your organisation at a senior level, who will then open doors. And I found that the director of HR for me was a very vital in, because they have no prior allegiance professionally. So they're very open to sort of looking at, you know, this huge workforce with tremendous potential, and how can we tap into that and get the very best out of them.
Thank you, John. I think you're absolutely right. That partnership, stakeholder engagement, identifying senior executive colleagues to help you, and almost share the message is really, really key, really key. We have a question in the chat box. Robert, do you want to ask the question? Hello, Robert. I will ask the question on Robert's behalf. So do you think this would be useful to broaden the collaboration along with, because in Wales they have a structure where they have directors of therapies and healthcare science together as part of the health boards? Your thoughts, John?
I mean, it's very difficult just hearing that role in isolation. So I think understanding the structure and where it sits and in what committees it has effect. So one of the other things I would add is that your most effectiveness comes from sub-boards. So not necessarily those executive management boards, but having representation on those boards that sit underneath your executive committees. That's where you can truly be effective. So ensuring that you have effective representation across those areas, and whether that be in the form of a single role or that's shared, would be, you know, purely dependent upon the size and structure of your organisation, I would say.
As you say, it's important to understand the context around and the size of the organisation, what other services and professionals you have there, and how that works as part of the overall structure. Oh, we've got, I'm just looking at the chat here, John.
Yeah.
So there's a question there from Tracy. I don't know if you want to ask the question or if you...
Initially, there was a great deal of scepticism from certain colleagues with sort of in different AHP professions. So I think initially a lot of the challenge was, do we actively chase those that aren't necessarily engaged, or do we work to push those that are really engaged and interested? And the decision that that I sort of took initially was that we would work hard with those that were really motivated and interested. And what we found is, as we've made those small wins and they've seen that progress, and the thing that really sort of broke the camel's back was when NHS England came in, and I think that really opened everybody's eyes to sort of what we can do as a group if we work together. And then really at that point, the gates came down and everybody came together and contributed. And we've seen a really kind of positive impact since. Mm-hmm. However, the challenge has been, where do we direct our energy? So do we direct our energy outwards? So do we project the sort of senior management structure, or do we aim down at our AHP body of staffing? And unfortunately, we don't have, because we have no dedicated role, all of this is done through goodwill. So everybody's making their own time because they can see the value in it. Yeah. And due to that time limitation, we felt that the bigger impact would be to look upwards. That's where we felt the bigger challenges were. But the future plan is that we look down and we really look at how can we integrate at a grassroots level our AHP professions, sort of at our junior banding levels.
And thank you, John. And I think what you're describing there is kind of the influence and where you have that influence, and the journey, and the, as Tracy said there, the momentum, really, really important to continue that. Just aware of time, any last questions, and then we'll move on. John, thank you so much, really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if I may introduce our second finalist, who is Andy Swinburn. Hello, Andy. Associate Director, Paramedicine at Welsh Ambulance Services Trust. Andy's going to tell us all about his fantastic work. Over to you, Andy.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come and present to you this afternoon. So I'm hoping you can see my screen. So my project and my initiative was around some rotational work in advanced paramedic practice within the Welsh Ambulance Service. What I'm going to touch upon on the presentation is some of the drivers that have put this on the agenda, the model and how the rotational methodology works, the impact from the pilot studies and beyond, and then the potential for upscaling and mainstreaming this project into conventional practice. So in the little blue box to the side of your screen at the moment, you'll see some highlighted points that I've lifted from a Royal College of General Practice, Royal College of General Practitioner report in Wales that spelled out quite a bleak picture in terms of how primary care might look in the years going forward, with 31% of GPs saying at least once a week they're so stressed they feel they can't cope, and 23% of GPs saying they're unlikely to work in general practice in 5 years, and so on and so forth. And that paints a really quite a bleak picture for us. And when you compare that to the graph that you can see just on the left hand side, this is a measurement of our activity in the ambulance service in Wales. And the blue line is a measure of our activity during a Monday to Friday period. And the orange line is the measurement of our activity on a Saturday and Sunday period. These all relate to healthcare professional calls. And so what you see there is a consistent and a sustained healthcare professional calls on Monday to Friday around the middle of the day, which have a huge impact on our ability to respond. Because essentially the whole of the fleet go mobile towards the mid to late morning and then end up at the front doors of the secondary care units, be that ED or wherever, and then essentially struggle to offload. And we see that every single day, Monday to Friday, but we don't have the same pressures on Saturday and Sunday. And so that really stands out to me as a very predictable activity that very much relates to the blue box, where it shows that pressure that there is existing within primary care, that is that unmet need is simply spilling over into what a 999 calls. And whilst not necessarily pointing a finger of blame, what I'm looking at is a situation where essentially nobody is getting the service they require simply because of this unmet pressure in primary care. And then it also asks the question as to, in the ambulance service, being having a national footprint, is this something we can do to intervene there to manage these patients in a much more effective manner? And that's essentially where we go on to. When you look at the number of jobs and the type of incidents coming into the ambulance service, there's some 2017-18 data here. And that just gives a breakdown of the calls coming into our emergency medical services by age group. And you can see it is predominantly the older people within our population that are the biggest users of the emergency medical services. Slightly more females than males, but very much the older population. And accompanying that is, of course, frailty. Further on, when you then go to break that down further and start to look at what the nature of the calls that they are attending, you'll see that the traditional type of calls that you'd expect the ambulance service to be called to aren't necessarily featuring in the top 10. With things such as calls from a healthcare professional, breathing problems and chest pain being right up there in terms of the main, what constitutes the main number of calls that we get from that older population, which very much suggests that there is an element there of primary care activity that's coming through into our emergency medical service. Alongside that, we also see another trend, and depending on which side of the fence you sit on as to whether this is a worrying trend or actually quite a pleasing one. And this is data from England, and things have moved on considerably since then. But what you see is an ever-increasing movement of paramedics away from ambulance services into other parts of the health economy. And in the example given here from England is into primary care. Now, as a fellow of the College of Paramedics, this warms the cockles of my heart to see my fellow professionals stepping out from the ambulance service and going into broader roles in other parts of the health economy, and I think that's fantastic. But as a senior manager in an ambulance service, this scares the bejesus out of me, because essentially we're going to be really at a loss to keep up with this pace of attrition of paramedics moving on. So we need to make sure as an ambulance service we increase our competitive offer for professionals working in the ambulance service, to ensure that they can see that there is a route of career progression, and actually their skills can be tested and developed and broadened whilst working for the ambulance services, as well as moving out into primary care. So we developed a model, and this was our model of rotational working, where essentially our advanced paramedic practitioners, so these are paramedics at least 5 years post-registration, often significantly more. They've done an MSc in advanced clinical practice at one of the universities in Wales. They've got additional assessment skills, interventions, and a range of pharmacology, and they're tasked to attend calls and keep people well at home. That was the objective of their remit. And whilst they were on hand to deal with any immediate life-threatening emergencies, the principle in which they were deployed was to identify the patients best suited to be managed in a home setting. And the model looked like this. So there was 3 parts to the rotation. In the orange part, you'll see this was out on the Welsh Ambulance Service Rapid Response Vehicle, where they would do that pathway navigation and a proactive prevention role in identifying the suitable patients and attending those and keeping them well and home and reduce ambulance conveyance. The yellow part is the rotation into primary care, and they would work in primary care doing things such as home visiting, so community paramedicine, care planning in specific aspects, and reducing healthcare professional calls. So at the time when the GPs and primary care were overstretched, they would give a real opportunity to bolster that workforce and prevent some of those calls coming into the ambulance service by giving greater resilience in primary care. And then finally, and just as important, was our WAST clinical contact centre rotation. So this is our control room where all the calls and all the dispatch take place. So it's important that we had a senior clinician, another one of our advanced paramedic practitioners in that setting, to ensure that, first of all, that those calls were being tasked correctly, but also to be a source of reference for other referrals for conventional ambulance resources. And this was the impact. So from the North Wales pilot, we saw quite a dramatic impact. So of the calls they attended, only 30% of those patients then went on to the emergency department. And I'll give you some comparisons as to how that compares with conventional resources in a moment. But additionally, of the calls that did get transported to the emergency department, that 30%, only 13% of those went in an emergency ambulance. So in terms of being ambulance sparing and ensuring the ambulances remain free to attend for those life-threatening emergencies such as the strokes and the heart attacks and the road traffic accidents, then the ambulances were kept free to attend to those where their skills and their conveying resource was absolutely necessary. And when we added that up in the total throughout the course of the process, the number of hours we managed to save. Now, I'm not going to give you the breakdown because we'll talk about this for an hour, and I'm conscious you know I'll start sweating when I go on too long. But essentially, we saved 732 ambulance hours. And bearing in mind, this was two response cars responding during the day that managed to really save some ambulance hours over that short period of time. So definitely getting some bangs for buck. So when we look at the comparison, I'll speak about the top graph principally, where you see our codes are the things that when a call comes into the 999 centre, we code them into different categories. You saw those earlier, and we did a comparison. And the blue graph there, you can see the APPs in the previous year before the trial the conventional resources before the trial. What was the conveyance resource? Well, they conveyed 67%. And likewise, during the time we ran the pilot, those conventional resources also conveyed 67%. However, when the intervention of the APP, that dropped to 33%. So over half the number of calls were conveyed to the ED department when we compare that to conventional ambulance resources. And for all the other codes, you can see we had an equally pleasing result. So it really showed the impact of sending these professionals to the targeted calls where they could manage people better in the community. So where have we gone now? We're beyond the pilot. Well, we've got 3 of the areas within Wales. The North Wales, the Betsy Cadwallader area, we have APPs rotating to the 4 primary care clusters. In the Howell Vale, we've got APPs rotating to providing some out-of-hours cover. And in ABMU, so in our Bevin area, down in South East Wales, with APPs rotating into a primary care centre. And we're developing schemes across the other patches as interests see fit. And like John's presentation, there has been a certain amount of pausing of that work while COVID was taking place, but the rotation still continued throughout that process. And the impact that we've seen in those rotations mirrors the pilot up in North Wales, so really demonstrated that this is an expandable prospect that we could share across the patch. So in summary, it's been a huge assistance during the COVID-19 pandemic. There has been a huge push to manage as many people in the community as possible, and the role of an advanced paramedic practitioner working in this role has been invaluable and really shown that this is the right direction of travel, both for the pandemic response, but of course for normal business as well. However, for the learning for the ambulance service, it illustrated this need for a strategic transformation in how ambulance services respond to how our patients present. But we've got a model there that can be expanded across Wales and beyond, and we're seeing examples of this springing up in England and in other parts of the UK. The learning for me was collaboration was key. This isn't something we could do just on their own. It wasn't something, an initiative that I did all on my own. It was a key members of the team within the organisation, but also broader into other parts of the healthcare settings and other parts of the health economy. For me, rotational working can play an instrumental role, and I think it's something that all AHP professions, should I say, should look to as an examples as how they can retain staff and give staff more challenging and fulfilling careers as they go on through their career. And of course, it's so applicable to all AHP sectors, not just paramedicine, where I can see this working across different professions in different settings, probably offering the same kind of benefits that we've seen. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take whatever questions.
Thank you so much, Andy. That's so interesting. And I've just written down all your numbers. The 732 ambulance hours. That's just, you know, just as I know there are many other numbers, but actually they're significant in terms of patient care. Over to colleagues on the call to ask Andy any questions, if that's okay. If not, I have a question or two, but I'll wait a minute. I'll perhaps ask you a question first, if I may, Andy.
Yeah, sure.
Can I just ask, and you may have covered it, but what is the feedback? Because it's just such a flexible model for the professionals and the paramedics going through this. How is it received by patients? Appreciating they don't necessarily need to see the model, but what's the feedback like?
We sent out a number of questionnaires to the patients on the pilot that were involved, and we wrote to them afterwards to say, how did you feel about a paramedic attending and keeping you at home? What was really quite interesting is initially some of the patients were a little bit concerned about the paramedic turning up. Not because it was a paramedic, but because they were wearing a green uniform, which they associated with a trip to hospital. And so one of the things we did really quite quickly was take them out of uniform and put them back into normal civilian kind of clothes. And so they were less conspicuous. So the patients felt less intimidated and threatened by the prospect that an ambulance is here and therefore I am going to hospital. We also took them out of a response car and put them into an unmarked vehicle. So the association with the ambulance service was removed very early on. And that essentially addressed that main concern. But in terms of the care offered, it was rated very, very highly with some really good feedback from patients that actually often brought a lump to your throat with some of the quality feedback. We had no negative responses. There was some lessons to learn, which was usually around the speediness of response when they were requested to attend. but essentially in terms of patient satisfaction, it was extreme.
No, that's great to hear. I'm not surprised, but it's really lovely to hear that feedback. Andy, we've got a question here from Alison about, if I perhaps can read it out. What's your view on collaborating with other AHP colleagues such as occupational therapy and physiotherapy to expand the service and prevent even more admissions, particularly around pathways, as you had highlighted, falls, DVTs, respiratory, etc.?
Yes, I mean there is a clear link when you start to look at those patient categories that are flashed up on the screen in the presentation in terms of where other AHP expertise could really be that point of response. And I think there's much ambition in the organisation, and probably from myself, to see how we can collaborate to do that. Because often, you know, my view would be if we have responsive community services and we can use those AHPs with the skills and expertise they bring, then actually the role of the ambulance service should be only that of a redirect the course to where the specialist resource can respond to. Now that probably looks at a completely different way of working, in that people down for an ambulance for example a fall and don't get an ambulance. What they get is a responsive AHP, be that a physio or an OT or something of that nature. And so that would require a complete change in the way service is run, but nevertheless putting the patient at the centre, the patient would really get the optimum response, as opposed to the paramedic and the ambulance turning up, picking the patient up with their feet, and then making the secondary referral, removing that step and getting straight to the definitive care that that patient needs at that time. I think is probably the way forward for me in those kind of things.
No, absolutely. No, thank you, Andy, for that. If I may, I'll wait if there's any other questions, but I have one more, if that's okay. You talked about adoption of this quite significant model elsewhere across Wales and parts of England. Have you, because clearly the adoption and the principles can go anywhere in the ambulance services across the country. Would that be fair, Andy?
Yeah.
And are you seeing that progression quite quickly, appreciating the current period we're in, and that might have stalled things a bit, but
yeah, so HEE have been leading on a project on this one for a number of months with an ex-colleague who I used to work with back in England, and they've been seeing some significant progress in development of that. Yorkshire Ambulance Service is really taking a good run with this at this moment in time. Enviably, probably you're starting to overtake me at the moment, which is a bit of a frustration of mine, but a ho-hum. And then we see in other South Central Ambulance Service. So yes, there is real replication of this going on, and those rotation models come into place. And I think it's good to see ambulance services waking up to the realisation that they no longer have exclusivity on the paramedic profession, which makes me smile, as I say, because for so long they have, but now, as I said, that light bulb has come on that we need to offer fulfilling careers to our professionals, else otherwise we're just going to lose them all.
Of course. No, very, very good point, Andy. Thank you. I don't know if you've got any other questions, Andy. But thank you again. Really, really great presentation. Thank you very much for that.
No problem.
If I can move, last but definitely not least, Amanda. So Amanda, hi Amanda, Atkinson.
Hi.
Amanda, you're the locality lead paediatric occupational therapist from the south of Wales, so Swansea Bay University Health Board. And
Yes.
again, I know, a fantastic example of leadership here. So over to you, Amanda.
Oh, thank you, June, and yeah, thank you very much for inviting me today. I feel really humbled to be part of it, and after listening to you two, John and Andy, I'm like, oh, I don't know how I can compare, but I will tell you about my project, absolutely. So I'm lucky enough to work for Swansea Bay, and we have a really strong leadership team. And so when I went into my leadership role 3 years ago, I led sort of patient transformational changes really within the paediatric occupational therapy service across Swansea Bay. So at the time we had 3 different areas, we had Berkshire, East Talbot and Swansea. Why did I feel we needed to change? Well, our waiting lists were over 45 plus weeks. and with government waiting list targets within Wales, we had to see referral to treatment within 14. But that was just numbers. For me, it was about patient care, and it's always been about patient care. And so we had quite a lot of focus groups of what our population needs were, what people really needed from our service. How are we going to address all the government drivers of producing a healthy Wales to our Swansea Bay population? And we really felt that we wanted to work preventatively instead of firefighting like I think the service had done in the past. So from a leadership point of view, similar to what Jon said, really, that even though I'm here talking to you, I feel leadership is on every level. So really I identified the assets within my team, those that can do things far better than I can, and really challenging these people personally and professionally to develop. So each person to develop their unique skills and to have a really excellent skill mix and to be aware of our leaders really and those skills that we could use to our advantages. So what we did is we redesigned the service from scratch really. So we looked at our service vision. We looked at involving all the stakeholders. So looking, we engaged with our third sector colleagues, education colleagues, social care colleagues, and all our multi-professional colleagues within health as well, to see how we could redesign the service and how we could really change patient care for the better. So we redesigned a referral pathway, so we had open access referrals, allowing things to be more accessible. We respond within 3 days to every referral that we receive now. We evaluated and reflected on everything that we did. We made sure that all the decisions were equitable, that services were across the board, so now we had staff moving across bases, and we had tried to get staff working in the communities so we were more accessible. We made lots and lots of changes, but we really, at the forefront, we really wanted to have our focus on prevention, like I said, working as efficiently as possible. So really looking at that value-based healthcare, looking at improving what we did, seeing more children, more children be able to access the services. So really looking at that balanced system approach. So we worked on what our universal offers were going to be, what our targeted offers were going to be, because these were going to be much more sustainable. And then we looked at lots of projects, like we started doing some multi-agency groups. We did a lot more parenting training, so really empowering parents to make things more sustainable. We involved our local communities, like for example, we joined with Play Wales to do projects within the summer holidays, looked at focusing our care at sort of community centres, at local libraries. We also managed to get some cluster funding, so working in primary care, and that's somewhere that we really would like to shift our services further, actually. Again, doing a lot of engagement with parents and carers, and really then working on our specialist services. We had constant, as I say, evaluation from our patient-related experience measures and our patient outcome measures to ensure that we were giving good quality care. But what I think we did within our leadership is we made sure we were compassionate, inclusive, ensuring that all our qualified workforce were all working at a master's level, all our unregistered workforce were all working towards Agorid training, so everybody felt valued. One of the parliamentary reviews, one of the quadruple aims in the parliamentary review within Wales is about our workforce, and about we can't deliver services unless we've got a really strong workforce. So we did a lot about well-being, team cohesion, a lot about mental resilience. I can honestly say that during the COVID pandemic, I feel really, really proud of my paediatric OT team. We're all redeployed into assisting in acute services, but we still managed to maintain and keep our services going. We've been out there in the community, we've been working with education, offering advice clinics for teachers, for parents, and working with primary care colleagues, and that's been really successful. We've got some great patient related outcomes from those. I just wanted to touch on leadership really, as in obviously this is what the award is for, and leadership styles. I really wanted to take this opportunity really for thanking the leaders that I really look up to and I've learned from within my organisation. I have really, and I think networking is really important. In my personal life, I have lots of networks, and I really feel that that's given me mental resilience as a person. So in work, I think my network is within the Swansea Bay Health Board is really important to have the drive, the motivation, and the confidence for me to continue being a leader. I touched on during COVID, that during the pandemic, and I was redeployed myself, but my management, the management system within Swansea Bay has allowed me also to develop my leadership skills further by actually looking at the whole of the occupational therapy service across, and my managers have encouraged me to look at the balanced approach and look at supporting other services to redesign and to work together and share our universal and targeted offers to improve patient care and to improve the value of what we do.
Thank you, Amanda. It was a really great summary of lots of work from. I just remember when you said about the 45. I know it's not about numbers, but the 45 weeks moving down to a much more acceptable, easily accessible service, and what that entails in terms of all the things you've described. It's again quite a phenomenal experience, and brilliant to hear. Very humbling to hear that, because it's not easy and it's complex work, but clearly the tenacity has shone through. I think that, and the resilience, as you have very rightly said, of course. Any questions from colleagues on the? So we have a question here from Robert. Changing services, he says, can be very difficult for existing staff members. Did you face challenges from your team? And if so, how did you address these?
Yes, lots of challenges. I mean, change is quite difficult for many. So for me, it was about understanding how the change was affecting them, looking at their challenges and supporting them really through them. I mentioned about assets, and I really talk about this a lot. Really, as I looked at those within the team who I knew I had that respect and that followership from, and by working with those, then other people that maybe found change a little bit harder, then was easier to follow. So I can honestly say that I think we've won every member of our team over now. Yeah, there were challenges, but we have managed to overcome them through support as well, through my network.
Yeah, and you've also clearly, Alison, had Amanda, sorry, had lots of followers, because they have followed you through, which is brilliant. Yes. To even if they have followed at different rates, they've clearly come through, and that's clearly demonstrated through your work, which I think, as Alison said there, with passionate and compassionate leadership, as you clearly have described.
Yeah, thank you.
I just perhaps a question I think was just I had here about any particular. You mentioned a few things: assets, networks, those kind of things around it, engagement. Any other key sort of things that helped you with the success? Appreciating the bumps in the road, I'm sure, but you know.
Yeah, I think it was just having the patients and the carers always at the forefront. That's why we go into the profession. That's why we do what we do. It was definitely about seeing the changes within the children, and having that feedback from the parents of what we were actually doing was working, and it was life-changing for them. So we have constantly worked and held focus groups the whole time with children and parents and other stakeholders, and continue reflected on it. And I do believe that when you have such positive comments and such patient stories that we've had within our team, then that is all the motivation that you really need.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Amanda. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. So I thank you to Jon, Andy, and Amanda. Very different services and areas of leadership, I think, but actually there are some common themes across all, and I think some of those are, and others will have observations, but there's something about the visibility, impact and outcomes delivered by AHP leadership to deliver the best high quality patient care, and that comes through loud and clear through all of the submissions. And that's why it's so difficult, because you're all finalists and all winners in my personal view. But actually, it really, I mean, it's impressive. It's really impressive when you look at it. And I think also the piece about skills and competence rather than profession also comes through in all of those presentations in terms of common threads. And the importance of stakeholder engagement, influencing others, getting others to share your message rather than you, and the impact that networking and the support that you and your team need, as well as others, is really important, as well as at the centre of that, the patient and their family, carers, relatives, networks to support you in the work that you do. So thank you, all three of you, again, for your short presentations there, which gave us a great taste in advance of October the 16th, Will. So I will now hand over to Will, I think, and or Joy.
Well, thank you so much, June, for chairing our webinar so well and for your support of this important award. I think you'll agree, a truly inspiring set of projects there, and thank you to Andy, Amanda and Jon for taking the time to share your work with us today. This webinar is part of a series featuring many of the finalists from this year's Advancing Healthcare Awards, and the next webinar is on the 2nd of October, when we'll hear from the finalists in the NHS Employers Award for Outstanding Achievement by an HP or Healthcare Science Apprentice, Support Worker or Technician. Remember, please put 16th of October, the ceremony date, in your diary, tell all your colleagues, and book that now via the website. Thank you as always to Rachel, Joy and Ellie, our in-house team who have worked so hard to make these webinars happen, both organisationally and technically. And finally, this webinar will be available shortly on our website, together with the others in the series, details in the chat. So please share with those who weren't able to join us today. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your day.